building of the Highlands. Don't worry, this is not a long presentation. You're not going to be stuck here for the rest of the afternoon. It's only going to be about 5-10 minutes in time. But the period of history that I'm talking about is the War of the Jacobites. And to explain that, I need to go right the way to the beginning and tell you why the Jacobite Wars began. To do that, we go to the year 1688. At that time, the King of Great Britain is James Stuart. Now, James Stuart isn't liked by the people, he's not liked by the church, and he's certainly not liked by the government. So they chase him off the throne and they replace him with new monarchs, which is William and Mary. From that point on, James and his descendants will make several attempts to try and reclaim a throne that they believe is rightfully theirs. Now, the followers of James Stuart were known as Jacobites. The word Jacobite comes from James. Latin for James is Jacobus, so a Jacobite is a supporter of King James. Now, the first attempt to retake the throne happened almost immediately in 1689. The leader of the Jacobite army was a man called Bonnie Dundee. He raised the Highland clans and he faced the British army in battle at a place called Killiecrankie. Now, Killiecrankie was a victory for the Jacobites, but in the final moments of the battle, Bonnie Dundee raised his arm to shout charge and he was shot in the armpit. He fell from his horse and he died a short time later. So without a commander, the first Jacobite war simply fizzled out. There'd be a few years of peace until 1715. This time another member of Scottish nobility decided to raise the Highland clans to reclaim the Jacobite throne. This member of nobility was called the Earl of Mar. Now, the Earl of Mar was a member of British Parliament, so as any good politician, he had a great deal of trouble making his mind up. So his nickname was Bobbing John, because he was constantly bobbing from one side to the other. He eventually decided he was a Jacobite. He raised the Highland clans, and in fact he raised 10,000 fighting men. Once he had them, he had no idea what to do with them. He simply sat in the northeast of Scotland and he waited. This gave the British government time to begin recruiting soldiers for their own cause. Eventually the Jacobites would face the British army in the Battle of Sheriffmuir. Now, this battle lasted all day long. As the sun began to set, both armies withdrew from the field. Both armies claimed victory. Nobody was too sure who actually won the battle. The Earl of Mar withdrew back into the Highlands and the government army withdrew down to Stirling Castle. Around this time, King James arrived in Scotland. He stayed for a couple of months, realised all was hopeless, got back on board a ship and sailed to France, never to return. He was followed a short time later by the Earl of Mar. So the 1715 rising again simply fizzled out. In 1719, the Spanish got involved and they landed a small contingent of mountain troops on the west coast, but they were defeated at the Battle of Glen Shield. So the 1719 rebellion was very small. But in 1745, we have the most famous of all Jacobite risings. This time it was led by Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie. Bonnie Prince Charlie arrived in Scotland and many of the clan chiefs told him to go home. But he said, I have come home. He managed to raise a Highland army and he marched south. He captured the city of Edinburgh, but not Edinburgh Castle. He then defeated the British army at the Battle of Prestonpans in under 10 minutes. The order was then given to advance into England. Bonnie Prince Charlie wasn't happy with just capturing Scotland. He wanted all of Great Britain. So the army marched south. They marched as far south as Derby, just 125 miles north of London, when the order was given to turn around and head back to Scotland. By this point, the Jacobites had realised that not enough English Jacobites were joining the cause. Bonnie Prince Charlie had promised 10,000 English Jacobites, only 500 had joined. So the Jacobites begin their march north. In doing so, they win two more victories. First the skirmish at Clifton, and then the Battle of Falkirk. But after Falkirk, the order was given one last time to retreat into the Highlands. On the 16th of April 1746, the Jacobites and the British army face each other in one last battle that was known as the Battle of Drumossie Moor. We now call it the Battle of Culloden. The battle lasted less than 45 minutes, but in that time the Jacobites lost between 1,500 and 2,000 men. The British army lost 54 killed, 364 wounded. So it was a disaster for the Jacobites, and things were going to get worse for the Highlanders. because the government put laws in place to make sure that the rebellious Highlanders never rose up again. Now these laws included the banning of wearing Highland clothes, the banning of wearing tartan, speaking Gaelic, carrying weapons, and even playing the bagpipes. Although if you've heard the bagpipes, the last one's not necessarily a bad idea. The idea was to try and wipe out Highland culture and prevent the Highlanders from ever rebelling again. It didn't have its desired effect, because within a few years, rather than rebelling against the British Army, the Highlanders began joining the British Army and forming some of the most famous regiments, such as the Fraser Highlanders and the Seaforth Highlanders. Now after the Battle of Culloden, Bonnie Prince Charlie went into hiding. He hid on the west coast of Scotland for 9 months before eventually escaping to France. Once in France, he bothered the French king for 2 years before he was eventually thrown out of the country. He then returned to Rome, where he'd been born, and in 1788 he died a very sad, lonely, alcoholic figure. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I did there was take 60 years of Scottish history and condense it into a couple minutes. When I'm finished, if you want me to go into more detail, I'll be more than happy to do so. But now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the weapons and the clothing. To begin with, the first weapon I have here is a weapon that would have been carried by the poorer men in the clan. This is called a Lochaber axe. Now it's named after Lochaber, or the Fort William area, where they believe it originated. Now the weapon is very useful at keeping your enemy at a long distance. The blade is used for hacking and slashing, and the hook on the back is used against cavalry. As the cavalry charge towards you, you reach up, hook their clothing, drag them from the horse, and then finish them off with the blade. Now in many of the battles when the British cavalry charged, the Lochaber axe men would step forward and swing their blades towards the horse's legs. They're looking to cut the legs off the horses. If you cut the legs off a horse, the horse drops to the ground and the rider is much easier to deal with. So this is a poor man's weapon, but very effective when used correctly. But I'm dressed as a wealthier man, so my weapons are slightly different. To begin with, I carry one of these. Now this is my targe. It's a shield made of wood, covered with heavy leather on the front and deer hide on the back. It's then heavily studded. Now the studs aren't just for design, they add a little bit of extra strength to the targe, and they might help deflect musket balls. In the middle is a dome, which would sometimes contain a long metal spike. Now behind the targe, I carry my dirk. This is my everyday knife. I use it for hunting, cooking and fishing, but when I go into battle, I hold it in my hand behind the targe so that a large portion sticks out of the bottom. I can then use it to cut and rake towards my opponent's body. But my main weapon is my basket-hilted broadsword. Now the blade is sharpened on both sides so I can use it for hacking and slashing in both directions. The basket protects my hand, but it's also very effective as a knuckle duster in close combat. And at the front of the basket are 2 loops of metal. These are known as ears or lugs. Now if you can imagine my dirk is an enemy sword. If it slides down my blade, I can trap it between the lugs. If I twist, I can disarm my opponent or break his weapon. Now the Highland clans used their weapons in a very distinct tactic called the Highland Charge. They would line up opposite their enemy with their pipers out front playing the traditional tunes. When the order is given, they will charge across the field, protecting their upper body behind the targe. When they reach the front line of the enemy, they push into them, they cut towards the body with the dirk, and they hack with the sword. Which means the Highlanders were very effective at smashing their way through the enemy lines, which they had done in so many battles. But there's one weapon which is the most famous weapon used in the Highlands. And I have that just here. That weapon is the claymore. Now claymore is basically Gaelic for the great cleaver, or the great sword. It's a large two-handed sword. One hand goes at the top, the other hand goes at the bottom. And it's designed to cut across a man's body. When this weapon first came into use, men were still wearing armor, whether it's metal armor or heavy leather buff coats. This sword is not designed to cut through the armor. It's designed to be brought down on a man's head, neck or shoulders, smashing and crushing the bone underneath the armor. Because of that, not all of the blade was sharpened. Only the last 6 or 7 inches were sharp, which means in close combat you can grip the blade and use it to thrust towards your opponent. Now this is a very large sword, so it's very difficult to carry around. You can't put it in a sword belt because when you walk it drags on the floor. You can't carry it on your shoulder because if somebody calls your name and you turn quickly, you're going to cut the head off. So this was carried in what was called a baldric. Now a baldric is a simple leather scabbard which covers the blade and then has a strap from the top to the bottom. It means you could loop the sword onto your back and carry it around very easily. If you're attacked, you remove the sword from your back, you take off the baldric, and you're ready to fight. Now that's how most Highland men would carry this weapon. One man would use it slightly differently, and his name was Mel Gibson. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Braveheart, there are lots and lots of problems with this movie, and I'm going to point out just one for you. Now, before one of the battle scenes, you'll see Mel Gibson with a large two-handed sword on his back. He then charges across the field towards his enemy, and he's seen drawing the sword up over his shoulder. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is physically impossible. Your arms have to be about 5 feet in length, and that rules Mr. Gibson out because he's only about that tall. So the sword would be carried on your back, but you removed it before battle, you took off the baldric, and you were ready to fight. The last time this sword would be used in any great numbers was at the Battle of Sheriffmuir in 1715. Now that battle, the Highlanders charged across the field with two hands on their claymores. They charged into musket fire. With no defense against the musket fire, the claymore was quickly abandoned. Now just before we finish, I want to tell you a little bit about the clothing I'm wearing. Now I am not wearing a kilt. A kilt is a more modern invention. I'm wearing what's called the philomore. But in a moment, rather than me tell you, I'll show you how the philomore works. But on my head I'm wearing a traditional Highland bonnet, which is called the Scots bonnet, and it is blue, and on it I have a white ribbon. Now this white ribbon is called a white cockade, and it's the way that symbolized that I was a member of the Jacobite army. If I supported the British army, I might wear a black cockade or a red cross. Without my hat, all Highlanders looked alike. Now this leads me to the point to say I am not wearing any clan tartans. Clan tartans are a modern invention. In the 17th and 18th century, Highlanders wore whatever tartan they wanted to wear. An example is if you kill a man in battle and he's dressed better than you, you simply take his clothes and begin wearing them yourself. So you wear whatever tartan you wanted to wear. But it's easier for me to show you how a philomore works rather than telling you about that. And for this, I'm going to need a volunteer. Sir, if you do this just for a moment. A volunteer, come and help me. The reason I picked this gentleman is because we look very much alike. Now, what's your name? We're never going to remember that. This is Hamish. Now, Hamish is what's called a stockman in clan society. A stockman is a very, very poor man, such as a pig farmer. So Hamish is a very smelly pig farmer. But we will dress exactly the same. To begin with, we need a length of tartan. Now Hamish, if you take one side, I'll take the other. We're going to lay it completely flat on the floor. Now the philomore to begin with, depending on your place in society, would depend how much fabric you could afford. A wealthier man might wear 5 to 6 meters, but poor Hamish here is so poor, he's only got about 4 meters. Now once we've laid it out, we need to make it smaller so it's easier to wear. And to do that, I'll simply kneel at one side. I then pull the fabric towards me, creating pleats. Now what this means is this garment will fit everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're tall, short, fat or thin. It's a one-size-fits-all garment. Now I'm sure Hamish dresses himself every morning, but this is the first time he's ever dressed like a real man, so I'm helping him out here. Now it takes just a few moments. Now once it's pleated up, we need to hold it in place. That can either be with a leather belt or just a simple piece of fabric. I'm going to lift up the pleats and force the belt underneath. Now this is almost your role, Hamish. If you'll come stand here, face the audience, you're then going to sit right in the middle of the pleats. That's it. Now if you'll move down just a touch, just Hamish. That's perfect. Lay back, put your hands behind your head, imagine you're at the beach. Now for me to dress you, I'm going to have to step over you. You're going to have a desperate urge to look up my kilt. If you could just keep your eyes closed for just a moment, that'd be great. Now the next thing I need to do is pull out a bit of fabric on each side, fold it across the front to protect his modesty. So I'm going to pull a little bit on this side and drape it over the front. Now close your eyes, watch it. And then I'm going to pull out a little bit more on this side, fold it over. Now we belt it in place. Now you know the belt is tight enough when Hamish turns a pale shade of blue. There we go, if you give me your hand, I'll help you up. Now the fabric drops down. It looks like he's wearing a dress, but we're not finished. We'll deal with that. As you turn around, does his bum look big in this? Now if I lift up this fabric, you can see the pleats underneath. This is where we get the modern kilt from. These pleats are stitched in, the excess fabric is chopped off, and you have what's called the fill-a-beg. Now if you turn around, Now the excess fabric's very useful. When Hamish is travelling through the mountains on a cold day, he can wrap it over his shoulders and wear it as a cloak. If he's sleeping in the mountains, he will pull it over his head and use it as a sleeping bag. It's a very versatile garment. But Hamish is a warrior, so we need to free up his arms for fighting. So to do that, I will take one side, you hold that just there, then take a little bit from the other side, pull it up over your shoulder, and we'll simply pin it in place. Now this is the dangerous part, and only get a nerve here. Now you can see it's now wrapped around his body so his arms are free for working in the farm or fighting on the battlefield. Now we need to give him his weapon, and because he's a pig farmer, we'll give Hamish a pig farmer's weapon. Now do not be fooled, Hamish is a killing machine. If I give the order, he could take half of you out in just a few moments. But Hamish has one other secret weapon. This is a weapon that strikes fear into the heart of his enemies, and it was often used by Highlanders on a warm sunny day. Before he went into battle, he would reach up and he would unpin the fabric from his shoulder. He then reaches to his belt line, he unties the belt, and he allows the Phillimore to fall to the ground. The Highlanders will then charge into battle wearing nothing but their shirt tails. Now ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but 2,000 to 3,000 semi-naked men running towards you with axes, that can be quite intimidating. Now if you give a round of applause for Hamish. Not too much. I did all the hard work. He just stood there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, that was 60 years of Scottish history condensed into a few minutes, and a little bit about the weapons and the clothing. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to come up and ask. I'll do my best to answer. But thank you very much for sticking around. Hope you enjoy the rest of your visit to the castle. Have a great day, folks. Thank you very much.